Stop. Before you scroll, something in you already knows this isn't random. You've felt it, haven't you? That quiet shift, the subtle distance, the way certain conversations started to feel off, not loud, not obvious, just enough to make you question your own instincts. And what you're about to hear might feel uncomfortable, but it will also explain why things haven't been making sense. Because sometimes, the deepest betrayals don't come from enemies, they come from people who stood close enough to understand you. You're not imagining it. You're not overthinking. What you felt was real, just incomplete. Because when someone close to you starts moving differently, it's rarely about one moment. It's a pattern. A slow, almost invisible change in tone, in energy, in presence. And the hardest part is this: people don't always confront you directly. Sometimes, they withdraw, they observe, they collect, and then they act in ways that leave you confused instead of certain. You gave your trust in a natural way. You showed up honestly. You spoke without filters. And over time that openness became a kind of map. One that revealed where you're strong, but also where you're vulnerable. Not because you were weak, but because you were real. And not everyone knows how to handle real. Some people study it. Some people misunderstand it. And some use it. At first, it didn't look like anything serious. Small inconsistencies. A comment that didn't quite sit right. A moment where support felt slightly delayed or slightly forced. You brushed it off. You told yourself it wasn't a big deal. Because you didn't want to believe that someone close to you could carry a different intention beneath their words. That kind of realization doesn't come easy. It resists acceptance. But then something changed. The pattern repeated. The energy became heavier. Conversations felt less genuine. There were gaps. Things unsaid. Reactions that didn't match the moment. And without realizing it, you started adjusting yourself. You became more cautious, more aware. Not because you wanted to, but because something inside you was trying to protect you before your mind could fully understand why. And then came the moment that shifted everything. Maybe it wasn't dramatic. Maybe it was just a sentence, a tone, a piece of information that didn't align with what you thought was true. But it was enough. Enough to break the illusion. Enough to make you pause and rethink every interaction that led up to that point. And suddenly, things started connecting. Not perfectly. Not all at once. But enough to make you realize this wasn't just misunderstanding. This was intention, subtle, indirect, but present. And that realization doesn't just affect how you see them. It affects how you see yourself. Because now you're asking questions you never thought you'd have to ask. Questions about trust, about awareness, about how you let someone get that close without noticing the shift sooner. But here's where everything begins to change. Because this moment, this uncomfortable clarity, isn't here to break you. It's here to sharpen you. You're starting to see patterns you once ignored. You're recognizing energy, not just words. You're noticing inconsistencies faster. And even though it feels unsettling, it's also making you more aware in a way you weren't before. You're not closing yourself off, you're becoming more intentional. There's a difference. You're not losing your ability to trust, you're refining it. You're learning that closeness should be earned over time, not assumed based on familiarity. And that shift is powerful. Because now, you're not just reacting to people, you're observing them. You're not just listening to what's said, you're paying attention to what's consistent. You're not just giving access, you're evaluating who truly respects the space you create. And slowly, something inside you is stabilizing. You're less affected by external behavior, less shaken by inconsistency. Not because it doesn't matter, but because you're no longer dependent on it to define your sense of clarity. You're building that clarity from within. That's the identity shift most people never reach. You're becoming someone who doesn't need constant reassurance to feel secure. Someone who doesn't ignore discomfort just to maintain peace. Someone who understands that awareness is not negativity, it's intelligence. And that emotional intelligence doesn't just protect you, it guides you. And yes, it takes courage to accept this. To admit that not everyone who stood close to you had pure intentions. To accept that you might have overlooked things, not because you were careless, but because you chose to see the good first. That's not weakness, that's humanity. But now, you're adding awareness to it, and that changes everything. Because from this point forward, your energy moves differently. You don't need to confront everything. You don't need to explain yourself to everyone. Sometimes, the most powerful response is distance. Silent clarity. A quiet decision to step back and observe rather than react. That's not avoidance, it's control. And what you're stepping into now is a different level of self-respect. One where your peace isn't negotiable. One where your presence isn't automatically available. One where your awareness filters what enters your space. So if this message found you at the exact moment you needed it, take a second and sit with that. Not everything that feels uncomfortable is meant to harm you. Some things are meant to wake you up. And if you're ready to keep strengthening this mindset, if you're ready to understand yourself and others on a deeper level, then stay connected to the chosen era. Because this isn't about fear, it's about clarity. It's about growth. And most importantly, it's about becoming someone who sees clearly, moves wisely, and chooses peace with intention. And the more you sit with that clarity, the more you begin to notice something else. Your reactions are changing. What used to trigger you instantly now makes you pause. What once pulled you into overthinking now feels easier to step back from. It's not that the situation didn't matter, it's that you're starting to matter more to yourself than the confusion around you. There was a time when you would have chased answers. You would have tried to fix the energy, to understand every detail, to restore what felt off. But now, something inside you is choosing a different path. Not avoidance, but awareness. You're realizing that not every situation needs your involvement to reach its conclusion. Some truths reveal themselves more clearly when you stop interfering. And this is where your growth becomes visible, not to others, but to you. Because you're no longer trying to prove your worth to people who already had access to it and chose not to value it correctly. You're not over-explaining your intentions. You're not bending your boundaries just to keep connections intact. You're starting to understand that respect isn't something you demand, it's something you align with. And when it's not there, your distance says everything that words don't need to. There's also a deeper realization forming beneath all of this. Not everyone who comes into your life is meant to stay in the same role. Some people are temporary mirrors. They reflect patterns back to you. Patterns of trust, of attachment, of tolerance. And once you see those patterns clearly, the dynamic naturally changes. Not because you forced it, but because you outgrew it. That doesn't mean you have to carry resentment. In fact, holding on to that would only keep you connected to something you're trying to move beyond. Instead, what you're learning is something far more powerful: detachment with understanding. Seeing things for what they are, without needing to turn them into something they're not. And yes, there may still be moments where your mind goes back. Moments where you question, where you replay conversations, where you wonder how long this was happening without you fully seeing it. That's part of the process. Awareness doesn't erase emotion overnight, but it does change how long you stay stuck in it. Because now, you catch yourself sooner. You notice when your thoughts start circling. You recognize when you're about to fall back into old patterns of overanalysis. And instead of getting lost there, you gently bring yourself back. Back to the present. Back to what's real. Back to what you can actually control. Your actions, your focus, your energy. And that's where your power stabilizes. Not in knowing everything. Not in having all the answers, but in knowing yourself well enough that you don't lose your center when things around you feel uncertain. That kind of stability doesn't come from external validation. It comes from internal alignment. The quiet confidence that you're moving in a way that respects your own boundaries. As this continues, you'll start noticing something subtle, but important. Your circle begins to shift. Not necessarily in a dramatic way, but in a natural one. Certain conversations won't feel as engaging. Certain dynamics won't hold the same weight. And at the same time, you'll feel more drawn to spaces and people that reflect clarity, honesty, and consistency. That's not coincidence. That's alignment. Because once your awareness sharpens, your tolerance for confusion decreases. You don't entertain mixed signals the way you used to. You don't ignore discomfort just to keep things familiar. You trust that initial sense, the one you once questioned, and you allow it to guide your decisions more confidently. Because once your awareness sharpens, your tolerance for confusion decreases. You don't entertain mixed signals the way you used to. You don't ignore discomfort just to keep things familiar. You trust that initial sense, the one you once questioned, and you allow it to guide your decisions more confidently. And with that comes a quiet kind of peace. Not the kind that means everything is perfect, but the kind that means you're no longer fighting yourself to maintain something that doesn't feel right. You're no longer forcing connections to match your expectations. You're allowing things to reveal themselves, and then choosing accordingly. That's maturity in its real form. And as you move forward from this, there's one thing you begin to understand on a deeper level. Not every revelation is meant to lead to confrontation. Some are meant to lead to transformation, to a shift in how you show up, how you trust, how you protect your space without closing your heart. You don't have to become cold to become aware. You don't have to lose your openness to become wise. You just have to balance both. And that's exactly what you're starting to do. So if you've made it this far, recognize what that says about you. You didn't run from the discomfort. You stayed with it long enough to understand it. And that alone is something most people avoid. Keep going. Stay connected to this level of awareness. Because the more you strengthen it, the less anything outside of you will have the power to shake what you've built inside. And if this perspective resonates with you, if it's helping you see things more clearly, then this is just the beginning of what you're capable of understanding. And as this awareness settles deeper into you, something else begins to shift. Your silence starts to carry meaning. Not the kind of silence that comes from confusion or withdrawal, but the kind that comes from clarity. You're no longer reacting to every inconsistency. You're no longer explaining yourself just to be understood by people who already chose not to understand you correctly. There's a different kind of strength forming now. It's quieter, more controlled. You start to realize that not everything deserves a response. Not every truth needs to be spoken out loud to be valid. Some realizations are meant to stay within you, not as secrets, but as anchors, as reminders of what you've learned and what you will no longer ignore. And this is where your presence changes. People may not be able to explain it, but they'll feel it. The way you carry yourself becomes more grounded. You listen more than you speak. You observe more than you react. And without forcing anything, you begin to create a kind of boundary that doesn't need to be announced. It's simply felt. That's the difference between someone who is still searching for clarity and someone who has found it within themselves. You're no longer looking for confirmation in every interaction. You're no longer depending on others to validate what you already sense. That inner voice, the one you once doubted, is becoming stronger, clearer, more consistent, and instead of questioning it, you're starting to trust it. But here's the part that changes everything. You begin to see that what happened wasn't just about them. It was also about the version of you that allowed certain patterns to continue longer than they should have. Not because you were unaware, but because you were hoping for a different outcome. You were giving chances, extending understanding, trying to see the best, even when something inside you felt off. And there's no shame in that. But there is growth in recognizing it, because now, you're not just seeing what others did, you're understanding what you tolerated. And that awareness gives you something powerful. choice. The ability to respond differently next time. The ability to recognize early signs and act on them without hesitation or guilt. That's how cycles end. Not by changing other people, but by changing your own standards, your own boundaries, your own willingness to stay in spaces that don't align with who you're becoming. And as you make these internal shifts, something interesting happens. You stop needing closure in the way you once did. You don't need a full explanation. You don't need every detail confirmed, because the clarity you've gained is already enough. You've seen what you needed to see. You've felt what you needed to feel. And now, you're moving forward, not with unanswered questions, but with a deeper understanding that doesn't require external validation. That's freedom. And it doesn't come from controlling situations. It comes from releasing the need to control them at all. So now, when you look back, it doesn't hit the same way it once did. There's less emotion tied to it, less confusion, less attachment. Not because it didn't matter, but because you've processed it in a way that no longer holds you in place. You've taken the lesson and left the weight behind. And moving forward, your energy becomes more intentional than ever before. You invest it where it's reciprocated. You protect it where it's not. You become selective, not out of fear, but out of self-respect. That's the version of you that emerges from experiences like this. Not hardened, not closed off, but aware, balanced, and fully in control of what you allow into your space. So as you continue from here, remember this: what you went through wasn't meant to confuse you forever. It was meant to wake you up just enough to see clearly. And now that you do, you don't have to go back to who you were before this realization. You get to move forward, differently. And now, as you keep moving forward, there's a deeper layer of understanding beginning to unfold. One that most people never fully reach. You start to see that not every situation like this is about someone actively trying to harm you. Sometimes, it's about misalignment, insecurity, or unspoken competition that quietly builds beneath the surface. That doesn't excuse the behavior, but it explains the pattern. Because when someone feels uncertain within themselves, they don't always express it directly. Instead, it shows up in subtle ways, through comparison, through quiet resistance, through moments where your growth or your direction makes them uncomfortable without them even realizing why. And if you're not aware, you can internalize that energy and start questioning yourself instead of recognizing what's actually happening. But you're past that point now. You're beginning to separate what belongs to you and what never did. Their reactions, their distance, their inconsistency, that wasn't a reflection of your worth. It was a reflection of their internal state. And once you truly understand that, something inside you releases. You stop carrying responsibility for things you didn't create. You stop trying to fix dynamics that were never yours to fix. And that's where your energy becomes lighter. Not because everything is resolved externally, but because internally, you're no longer holding on to confusion that doesn't belong to you. You're no longer replaying scenarios trying to decode every hidden meaning. You're allowing things to be what they showed themselves to be, without forcing a different narrative. That level of acceptance is rare, and it doesn't make you passive, it makes you precise. You become more intentional with your time, your attention, your presence. You start to recognize that where you place your energy shapes your entire experience. And because of what you've learned, you're no longer willing to invest it blindly. There's also a quiet confidence forming in you now, one that doesn't need to be displayed or announced. It shows up in how you move, in how you respond, or choose not to respond, in how you maintain your focus even when distractions try to pull you back into old patterns. You're no longer easily shaken, and that doesn't mean you won't feel things. It means your feelings no longer control your direction. You can acknowledge them without being consumed by them. You can observe without reacting. You can understand without attaching. That's emotional discipline. And it's one of the strongest forms of growth a person can reach. Because now, when something feels off, you don't ignore it. But you also don't panic. You assess. You give yourself space. You allow clarity to come naturally instead of forcing immediate conclusions, and that alone changes the outcomes of your experiences in ways you can't always predict, but you can always feel. So what happened, as confusing as it once felt, served a purpose. It showed you where your awareness needed to sharpen. It showed you where your boundaries needed to strengthen. And most importantly, it showed you that your inner sense, the one you once questioned, is far more accurate than you gave it credit for. That's something you carry forward now. Not as fear, not as suspicion, but as grounded awareness. And with that awareness, you begin to build something stronger than trust in others. You build trust in yourself. The kind of trust that doesn't collapse when situations change. The kind that doesn't depend on perfect conditions. The kind that stays steady, even when people around you shift in ways you didn't expect. That's your foundation now. So wherever you go from here, whatever connections you build next, whatever environments you step into, you're not the same version of yourself that entered this experience. You're sharper. You're calmer. You're more aligned. And most importantly, you're aware in a way that protects your peace without closing your heart. So keep moving forward with that, because this isn't the end of something, it's the beginning of how you move differently from here on. And as you carry this forward, something even more subtle begins to happen. You stop needing to label everything. You no longer feel the urge to define every person as good or bad, every situation as right or wrong. Instead, you start seeing things for what they actually are, experiences that either align with you or don't. That shift changes everything. Because when you stop forcing meaning onto people's actions, you start accepting clarity much faster. You don't argue with reality anymore. If something feels inconsistent, you don't try to rewrite it in your mind to make it comfortable. You let it be seen exactly as it is, and then you decide what to do with that truth. That's control in its purest form. And with that control comes a kind of peace that isn't dependent on anyone else behaving a certain way. You're no longer waiting for someone to do right by you in order to feel settled. You're no longer holding on to potential, hoping it turns into consistency. You're grounded in what is, not what could be. That's where emotional freedom begins. Because now, your decisions are no longer driven by attachment. They're driven by alignment. You choose based on what matches your energy, your direction, your values. And when something doesn't match, you don't hesitate the way you used to. You don't second-guess your instincts just to keep things intact. You move, quietly, clearly, without unnecessary explanation. And that kind of movement might not always be understood by others, but it will always make sense to you. And that's enough. There's also a deeper respect forming within you, not just for yourself, but for your time. You start to realize how valuable your attention is. How much of your life is shaped by where you place it. And because of what you've experienced, you're no longer willing to give it to situations that drain more than they give. That's not selfish, it's necessary. Because every moment you spend overanalyzing someone else's behavior is a moment taken away from your own growth. And now, you're reclaiming that time. You're redirecting that focus inward, toward your own clarity, your own progress, your own sense of direction. And that's where things start opening up for you, not in a dramatic, instant way, but in a steady, grounded way that actually lasts. You feel more centered, more focused, less scattered by external noise. And as a result, your decisions become sharper, your actions more intentional. You're no longer reacting to life, you're participating in it consciously. That's a completely different level of awareness. And it didn't come from everything going perfectly. It came from navigating something uncomfortable. and choosing to learn from it instead of being defined by it. So when you think back to where this started, the confusion, the subtle tension, the feeling that something wasn't quite right, you can see now how far you've come. Not just in understanding the situation, but in understanding yourself. That's the real transformation. And it's something no one can take from you. Because once you develop this level of awareness, it stays with you. It shapes how you see people, how you build connections, how you protect your peace without isolating yourself from meaningful experiences. It becomes part of how you move through the world. So as you continue from here, trust that you don't need to rush anything. You don't need to force clarity in every situation. What's real will always reveal itself over time. And now, you have the awareness to recognize it when it does. That's your advantage, not over others, but for yourself. And if there's one thing to carry with you beyond this moment, let it be this. You don't need to shrink your awareness just to stay comfortable. You don't need to ignore what you feel just to maintain connections. You don't need to go back to who you were before you saw things clearly. You're allowed to evolve. You're allowed to move differently. And you're allowed to choose peace, even if it means leaving certain things behind. So keep going. Stay grounded in what you've learned. Keep trusting that inner clarity that guided you here in the first place. Because the more you listen to it, the more aligned your path becomes. And that alignment is where everything starts to make sense. And now, everything settles into something quieter. Not confusion anymore, not urgency. Not the need to decode every memory or replay every moment, just clarity. The kind that doesn't shout, but stays. The kind that doesn't need validation, because it already feels true inside you. You start to understand something simple, but powerful. People don't always reveal who they are in words. They reveal it in patterns, in consistency, in what they do when no one is watching. And once you've seen that clearly, you can't unsee it. But here's what really matters now. You didn't lose yourself in this. Even when things felt uncertain, even when trust felt shaken, even when you questioned your own judgment, you stayed aware enough to find your way back to yourself. And that is not something small. That is growth that changes how you move for the rest of your life. Because now you know, clarity doesn't always come before the storm. Sometimes it comes through it. And what you're walking away with isn't bitterness. It isn't fear. It isn't closed energy. It's awareness. It's balance. It's the ability to see without being consumed, to understand without over-attaching, and to care without losing yourself in the process. That's your new foundation. And from here, you don't need to carry what doesn't belong to you anymore. You don't need to keep questioning your instincts just to make others comfortable. You don't need to over-explain your boundaries or your decisions. You simply live in alignment with what feels right, and let everything else fall where it naturally will. Because the truth is, your peace was never meant to be negotiated. It was meant to be protected. So moving forward, you walk differently now. Calmer, sharper, more aware of energy, but not controlled by it. More open, but not unguarded. More understanding, but not available to confusion. And that balance, that's what changes everything for you. If this message found you at the right time, it wasn't by accident. It's because a part of you was already ready to see things differently, to stop questioning your inner signals, and start trusting them instead. So take this with you. You don't need to prove what you already know. You don't need to chase clarity that has already revealed itself. And you don't need to return to spaces that made you forget your own awareness. You've outgrown confusion. Now you choose clarity. And if this message resonated with you, stay connected with the chosen era. Because this is where you don't just hear stories, you understand yourself through them. And maybe, just maybe, the next message will find you even more aware than this one did.